everyone, to a brand new episode of Viva Juego. This is our second episode of Ramble with a guest. I'm here with Nicholas Derk, and he's running the Kickstarter for a game called Sera, and it's running on iOS, if I understand that correctly.
iOS 7.
iOS 7, yes. And it's a wonderful little interactive kind of a storytelling sort of thing that you can interact with on a day-to-day basis and get to know the specific character. And I thought it was really something kind of unique that isn't really very, very well... It's not a very common type of game. So I asked him on the show, and he said yes. So here he is. Nicholas, so great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming on the show. So let's talk a little bit about, your background and how you got into games. I understand now you're developing for sort of an educational kind of app.
Yeah, my day job is with an education publisher, and unlike most publishers in education, they realized that technology could empower them fairly early on. So we have a division that creates printed study guides, and they're wildly popular. We've sold 1 million copies in Canada, where we're based.
Whoa.
And we're launching in the United States this year.
Oh, well, that's
but there's a whole other part of the company that works on not only the technology that we use to build our print books, but on web-based products, mobile apps, that kind of thing. So I am a product manager in that group.
Awesome. So Did you start thinking about working on Sera during your work here, or did you kind of have it planned before you even got involved in that? What I'm basically asking is, how you started to decide that you wanted to develop your own games.
Well, when the App Store launched and Apple kind of created this marketplace for mobile software, it seemed pretty empowering, like that anyone could build something with the skills and actually get it in front of an audience that would be willing to pay money for it. So I tried to bounce around ideas that I could create because I'm not a programmer by trade. And so I kind of came up with a few of the elements for Sera before I started working in mobile apps. And once I got a little bit of a taste for it, I realized that I had enough skills to manage the project with outside contractors. All I needed was the money, and so that's where the Kickstarter crowdfunding route came about.
So this is your first game that you're putting together?
Yeah, I've overseen, what is it now? I think it's 18 or 19 applications for iOS and Android, and this will be the first game that I'm trying to actually get made in terms of people giving me money. There's been a lot of things that have been false starts. But that's typical of anyone in any medium, I think.
Oh, awesome. So specifically, how did you get the idea for Sera? Well, maybe let's start by, could you tell the audience a little bit about what Sera actually is? I know I just kind of did like a slapdash description of it, but maybe you could tell them better. I'll
do my best. It's the trickiest part about this Kickstarter and about the game in general is there's no real precedent. It's hard to say it's Call of Duty meets Zelda or whatever kind of game you want. There's no real way to establish it in people's minds with what's already on the market.
Yeah, it's
the
definitely...
joke that I kind of told people while I was writing it out was it's a virtual pet / dating sim.
Oh my!
But that still isn't that accurate. So basically, what she is the whole game side of it is just conversing with her on a daily basis. So like a virtual pet, you have to talk to her every day. If you miss a day, she'll remember, and she'll bring it up. And if you don't agree with her, she'll also remember that, and she'll bring it up. Basically, there's a system in the back end that's tracking how she feels about what you're responding with, and that influences later conversations. So it's going to play out in terms of almost like a television season. So, and by the end of it, you'll have affected how the finale plays out.
Huh, that sounds really, really interesting. Yeah, so it doesn't sound too much like it's like someone that you talk to so much as someone that you kind of, they speak to you and you kind of respond with with like a certain kind of pick your own adventure, maybe. Well, not adventure, but like pick your own kind of the way that the story that you converse with her. Is that correct?
Basically, she has a whole backstory of being a prototype of Apple's Siri, registered trademark, and so basically she's a prototype who's discarded, and she looks at what is ostensibly her sister being very popular with kind of a jealous slant, and so when she gets on to the App Store, she basically has a mission to destroy Siri or anyone who likes Siri. But she can't really do anything because the App Store is sandboxed. So she's kind of just someone who rants. And when you have someone like that, how do you respond to them? How do you support them? And also, you could be a bit of a bully to her because she'll be a bit of a bully to you in certain instances. So it's more of a storytelling. It's a lot like a work of fiction where you're being told a story, but she will ask for your input in the form of yes or no questions, and depending on how you respond to those yes or no questions, it will affect later conversations and, like I said, the finale. And so the input's really simple. It's you can either say yes or no into the device, or there'll be on-screen buttons for yes or no if you're in like a crowded train or a library and it's supposed to be quiet, stuff like that.
Well, that sounds really cool. It reminds me a lot, sort of like the. I mean, this is still pretty generally rare, this kind of interactive fiction storytelling game, but the emerging popularity of like Twine games, which is something that this really reminded me of, where it was very much it's a storytelling kind of medium where something is asked of you and then you kind of respond and then you go. The story changes depending on your response. Have you ever heard of or like played any Twine games? I'm curious because
I don't recognize that term at all. In terms of kind of what I saw out there for precedent, in the Japanese market, there's a lot of what are called visual novels.
Yes.
Which are essentially pictures on screen with characters, and they say stuff. They have conversations, but even a lot of those games aren't actually interactive, and I wanted to have an interactive portion. At the same time, I read every Choose Your Own Adventure book that there was when I was a kid, but they actually weren't that interesting because the choices weren't very empowering. So I wanted to do something that was a little bit more subtle.
I wish I could ask more about the story, but I don't want to like try and get any spoilers out. I don't know if there's any kind of an interesting situation that might happen in the story that you kind of want to share, give us a teaser or something, or are you trying to keep that all kind of hush-hush?
I have an overall arc for how the story will go, and obviously it branches in subtle ways depending on how you respond to her. The one thing I will say is for the Kickstarter specifically, users who back the different tiers will get exclusive conversations with Sera that won't be available to users that just download and purchase the app from the App Store. So there'll be a regular kind of season, but there'll also be these bonus conversations that Kickstarter backers will get, and they're more little one-off vignettes. So.
Well, that's really cool. There you go, guys. Another good reason to go and support the Kickstarter. Okay, well, Nicholas, this is such an interesting, I guess you really aren't familiar with Twine, which I definitely recommend that you check out, even though that's more for, like, the PC. It's a little program where you do something very similar, but you seem to have a really interesting and unique game here, and what I really wanted to talk about, because it was so perfect for the subject matter, was how games are kind of classified, and there's been a lot of controversy based around sort of these kind of interactive storytelling games about whether or not they actually classify as games, because they don't really fit into sort of that kind of game in the traditional sense. So I was really interested in, if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of part of an interesting generation right now where like especially my wife and I, my wife is way better at video games than I am. That's what we primarily grew up on. There was generations that grew up on records and LPs. There was a generation that grew up on cinema. There was a generation that grew up on television. And now we're the generation that grew up on video games. And we're actually seeing our music and our television and our movies influenced by video games quite a bit. My favorite movie of the moment is Judge Dredd. And even though it's a very kind of faithful adaptation to the comic book, I'm talking about the 2012 one, not the Sly Stallone version. But in terms of being really lean and efficient in its storytelling and in the action that it portrays on screen, I see a lot of similarity with video games. So in terms of our culture and our generation, games are kind of the primary driver, I think, and the primary influencer in what we kind of are interested in. There's also this aspect then that games are kind of the ultimate medium, or kind of the pinnacle of every medium. Like prose was a very efficient way of getting stuff out with limited technology, but a lot of the more interactive, shall we say, elements were in the person's head. And then there was cinema, which was providing images and sound along with that. And then television broke it up into a more serial format, which I liked because I really liked the whole format of comic books, where you were developing a relationship with these characters over a long period of time. And now finally we're into games where through of Mass Effect right now, and I think the last time I checked, I'd spent 300 hours.
Oh goodness!
In all three of those games. So, I mean, that's kind of what I'm spending my time doing. So there's games in terms of what we classify as games on a store shelf, but really anything can be a game. A lot of the people in my office watch Breaking Bad, and every episode they play a drinking game along with it. Right? Like you can make a game out of anything you want. Is that the strict definition of a game? Probably not, but I think that definition is going to change over time.
Yeah, I am definitely pushing for that movement. Yeah.
In terms of Sera, a game is kind of the closest thing that there is to it, because there's user agency and there's different outcomes. But more, it's just kind of an evolution of storytelling. Or at least that's how I see it. But there isn't an evolutionary storytelling genre. So a lot of these things that are kind of evolving are probably going to be labeled as games for now.
And now I've completely forgotten what question I was going to ask you next. What kind of games... Yeah, let's ask that one. What kind of games... was there anything that inspired Sera, or something that said, like, I really want to do something like this, or something unlike this, or, I'm really curious as how you got specifically to the idea of Sera.
Yeah, so when I pick a video game to play, I'm more interested in the storytelling aspects than anything else. So in terms of games that really spoke to me, there are things like the Metal Gear franchise and Mass Effect, because they kind of were the best of both worlds. They had really good gameplay, but their stories and their characters were really compelling. So that's kind of primarily where I look to for that kind of stuff. So games that have a really strong sense of place and story and character, I'm really drawn to. I just finished BioShock Infinite, and I thought Elizabeth was a really neat sign of what's to come, right? Where it's not just about having interactions with characters at the other end of a gun. It's about having interactions with characters that will be pissed off at you for doing certain actions and affect you in other ways beyond just the core gameplay mechanics.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But getting into the areas of emotion and attachment and that kind of stuff. In terms of just straight gameplay influence, the Super Mario franchise is probably the biggest, because it's so pure, right? Like, it's so perfect and brilliant. I mean, I think we'll have kids 100 years from now playing Mario games, because it's the ultimate test of just skill, and they always balance the when you do something wrong, you don't feel cheated. You feel like you didn't do it correctly, and if you try it one more time, you'll get it. And that just, man, my wife and I have sunk so much time into Mario games. It's kind of sad. And the other one is a little bit obscure, but related to BioShock, is System Shock 2 from 1999.
Yeah.
I think that the whole world that they created there, where it was it had a lot of player agency, and you were in full control of your inventory and what you carried with you and what you left behind. It's science fiction, which nerds like me like, but then they wrapped it in this horror vibe, and I still think it's one of the scariest games that's ever been made. But an experience. And the other thing that I find very inspiring about that is they built that game in 11 months. And you look at games like even BioShock Infinite, which again I liked. They spent 4.5 years on that.
Oh yeah.
And so it's kind of like, after a while, I think it's diminishing returns in terms of how much time you're putting into a project. But I guess I'm getting ahead of myself into the what is my advice for game design hopefuls.
Oh yes, save that one till the end. But you brought something up that I thought was kind of a silly little question. But you said like the emotional kind of content of games, which is really kind of, it's also a pretty big hot topic right now about like games that move you in ways that you didn't really expect. I'm curious, did you ever have like a particularly emotional moment with a video game?
Well, I already talked about fear.
Oh yes.
To this day, I still feel fear when I play System Shock 2.
Yeah, I think fear is a pretty easy to do because there's risk and those kinds of things.
Yeah, Dan O'Bannon, the guy who wrote Alien, did Darkstar with John Carpenter before that, which was supposed to be a comedy in space, but nobody laughed. And so his quote is, everyone laughs at something different, but everyone's scared at the same thing. So horror is kind of could be considered a cop-out, but it can also be art when it's done really well.
Well, I mean, like, as far as horror is, even though it seems kind of easy to do, I've been surprised there's very few games that, they really try to be more like extreme than they try to actually scare you. So I don't know if maybe it's more difficult than it at first appeared, but I think it's a matter of your motivations, right? It's very easy to get into what I call torture porn, which has kind of invaded the film world in terms of horror films. Like after Saw came out, it was all about how shocking could they be with gore. And after a while, it just looks like they're pumping ketchup all over the place. Like you have to spend the time building up the tension and establish characters that the audience cares about. Because once the audience cares about the characters, you can start doing terrible things to them, and the audience will forgive you a lot because they want to see that this character comes out okay. So that really helps you there. In terms of other emotions in games, again, I think BioShock Infinite really brought a neat dramatic angle to it. I think that there'd be something to be said for getting more comedy in games. That does seem to be happening. Mass Effect has quite a bit of comedy in it. It looked like the new Deadpool game had a lot of comedy in it. But again, Deadpool is... Well, some people don't think he's funny. I think he's funny as a character. So I think there's more to be explored there, though. Another series that I thought had a neat comedic vibe to it, but again, it was very much in the service of you falling in love with these characters, was Drake's Fortune. So basically it's about, we have people now in creative positions like Ken Levine, and $100 million budget to make his games, and he can kind of do whatever he wants, and they're not afraid of what emotions a gamer can and can't feel, and that's time's just going to take care of that. Like, there's going to be more of this stuff as the decades roll on. Well, I'm certainly excited to see those entries. Well, I think, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about, Sera, or how you kind of came up with her?
Not really. I mean, it's just a matter of everything coming together at the right time. I've got some skills in terms of managing mobile products, so I felt confident that I could execute what I was asking Kickstarter backers to pay for. And Kickstarter came along at a time where we're starting to say, like Double Fine's the big example, right?
Oh yeah.
Every publisher said nobody makes money on adventure games, and Double Fine proved them wrong, right? And Kickstarter was the way to do that. It gave the ability for end customers to vote with their dollars, because at the end of the day, that's what speaks is money.
Mm-hmm.
Without money, nothing gets made that's sustainable, right? One-off projects might be made and at $0, but if you liked that, but it didn't make any money, it's very unlikely that you're going to see anything beyond that. So Kickstarter comes along at a time where I can throw a project like Sera out there, and granted, I'm finding it a bit difficult to articulate the concept to people, but if enough people do get the concept and are intrigued by it and pay for it, I'll have the resources to make it, and if they don't, then I won't. And I think that's a really neat way to go about it, because if Sera isn't successful, I'll just come up with another idea and try that out, and something will stick eventually. So
yeah. If Sera does well, do you have any plans to make any different games you're kind of waiting to put out there, or are you just kind of focusing on Sera right now?
Yeah, my notes app is filled with ideas, but ideas are kind of a dime a dozen. It's more about execution. And again, I'm getting into my game design hopefuls advice, but an idea can be the best idea in the world, but if it's difficult to execute, you're probably best to leave it alone, at least for the time being. Execution is more than half of the equation in any sort of medium.
Oh, too true. It's everybody's got like the $1 million idea, but most of them never get it off the ground, which makes me a little bit sad, but whatever. Well, Nicholas, you seem really eager to share that game design hopeful advice, and I'm kind of eager to hear it myself. You've kind of been touching up against it, but do you have any kind of tips or something that you've learned while you've been developing this game that you think that other people out there should really know?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll clarify that I still haven't shipped a game. I've shipped a lot of mobile software and worked in other mediums in my career, but this is my first game. My advice is more for anyone who's pursuing anything creative, because I find design, and particularly game design, to be purely a creative endeavor. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have two pieces of advice that I had to learn the hard way, and I hope someone gets some benefit out of that. The number one thing is start small. Some of the ideas I have in my notebook, again, like in terms of me having a focus on storytelling, when I was a kid, I really liked the idea of interactive movies, because they'd be as good as movies and be interactive. But those early experiments like Sewer Shark and Ground Zero Texas, those games really do not hold up. They were quick cash-ins, and that's it. And I have an idea in terms of how to improve interactive movie design, but the amount of money that it would take and the amount of time it would take to execute that, I can't do that at this stage in my career. I need to get better at a few things and establish a bit of a name for myself before I would be able to pursue something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of creative people and even engineers in terms of game development have a really grand plan, and they kind of put a lot of time and energy into that grand plan. But it's such a difficult goal, especially when you're still learning, and everybody is always learning to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But when you start out, it's a lot of learning, and so keep your stuff really, really small, because the more stuff you finish, the more stuff you take to completion, the more knowledge you're going to have to be able to carry forward in projects. And it's not just beginning developers that get this wrong. I brought up Double Fine. So they got, what was it, $4 million on Kickstarter to make an adventure game?
Yeah, I support them all the way for what they're doing, but I have to say that the way that particular Kickstarter was handled really didn't jive with me well at all. It was, I guess they were still kind of new to it, but I don't know. I'm really worried now that it might be overhyped or something might go wrong down the road.
Well, and I mean, there's something to be said for them taking it on the chin and saying, like, look, we screwed up on the scope of this project, and we're going to have to split it into two. But basically, like, here's Tim Schafer, extremely talented guy, extremely experienced guy, and he still had a problem with scope.
Oh, yeah.
One of the projects I backed on Kickstarter, which is called Republic, by an indie group called Camouflage. They do a monthly podcast that kind of takes us through the game development, and we keep track of how it's going. And they're already talking about how, well, they've already missed their ship date, and they're now talking about releasing chapters one at a time, because it's a big job to get everything put together on a software product. There's a lot of moving parts, and if you change something somewhere, it can affect other things elsewhere that you're not always testing for or not always considering.
Absolutely.
So when you're starting out, keep your scope really small, because you're just one person. One person isn't going to create a huge epic game. The other game that I played a bit of recently, and I want to get back to because it was kind of neat, was Mars Warlogs, and it was this tiny group of, I think it was 13 people who were really inspired by Mass Effect to do RPGs in that same kind of style. And they have a lot of things going for it. It's set on a future Mars that we've colonized. So that's not your traditional, prince in a castle goes to find a treasure or a maiden type RPG storyline. It's a very different setting, and it's really, really neat. And they do a pretty impressive job considering their team size. But there's a lot of rough edges, and I think that cuts down on the number of people who can get into it.
Yeah.
Some of the people who've seen the Kickstarter and spoken to me about it, they feel that my ask of $9,000 is too high, and I guess that means that people don't really understand the costs in terms of mobile development.
That is really something that kind of irritates me, that there's really not enough kind of understanding on that level, because what they see, and as well as not just supporting a Kickstarter, but also when you buy a game. I remember that a lot of people complained about this game called Gone Home, which was also a really big storytelling game. And I'm not sure, I think it was like $15, but the game in its entirety took about 2 hours to complete. And people were so upset that, they couldn't believe that they'd have to pay $15 for a 2-hour game. And it's like, because, like stuff with the Humble Bundle now, you can get like almost 9 games for like $5 if you wanted. And they really don't understand that all the work and the effort that goes into putting something together that feels so clean and cohesive. It's really not an easy thing to do. And I'm just figuring this stuff out for myself, so yeah, I totally agree, and,
Right, and in the case of Sera, I mean, the mechanics aren't that difficult. I need to store conversations with different branches and different attributes so that if you respond a certain way, I track that in a database so that in future conversations she checks against that and says, oh, he said something I don't like too many times, so now I'm going to start getting pissed off at him. Like, that's not that complicated, but in terms of my values, I want whatever is implemented in the game in terms of features to be really polished and really thought through. Mm-hmm. And that takes time, and it takes a lot of testing, and it takes a lot of patience. And that gets into the second piece of advice that I'm going to get into. But Sera is purposefully kept very, very small because I want whatever is in that game to be really, really well done. That's my North Star. Mm-hmm. So when you're starting out and you're building your own projects and you're trying to learn how this stuff works, keep it really, really tiny, because the other part of development in general, or working in any sort of medium, and this is my second point if you're writing this down, is that everything that you're doing is iterative, right? we can't all be Mozart who spat things out on the page perfectly, because even then he wasn't doing that the way that we think he was, right? He wasn't just writing things out as they occurred to him. He was working it all out in his head. And then once he had worked it all out, he was just transcribing it. But what we didn't see was all of the steps he took to create a symphony that was balanced and perfect, right? We do it all with pen and paper and with garbage everywhere, and I have so many TXT files on my Mac. It's ridiculous. He was, the only difference between me and him is that he was able to do it in his head, and he did a lot of it, right? Like he died young, but he started doing this stuff very young. So any medium you're working in, but game design or software development in particular, it's a highly iterative process. Like in terms of my teams, I throw things out there that I think will work, and when they show it to me, I'm like, you know what, that was kind of a stupid idea. And we just throw it out and we try something different, or I'm able to see it on a screen and touch it with my finger and play with it and be like, oh, you know what, I screwed up on this one thing, so if we change this one thing, it'll work a lot better.
Yeah.
And everything is like that, but games are particularly like that because there's a lot of different elements in place, right? Like there's no music in our educational apps, but there's got to be music, and it's got to be timed with the action on screen, and there's so many different elements that you're going to do a lot more work than what will appear in the final product. You're going to throw a lot of things out along the way, and just acknowledge that, right? So that's the whole thing about keeping your scope small and knowing that you're going to iterate. If you try and do a bunch of work right at the start and think that it's all going to come together, you're gonna throw a whole bunch of that out at once, and then you're going to feel dejected. So do the smallest, tightest prototype you can, just the bare minimum, and then work on top of that. Add things in gradually as you need it. That will be a huge confidence booster, because relatively quickly you'll have something that you can actually play or use and show other people, and they'll be like, wow, that's really cool. And that kind of stuff really can get you supercharged and keep you going through the process, because again, development takes a long time. So those are kind of the two big things. I always thought that you read things out of a book, and then you knew the knowledge, and then you applied the knowledge, and everything went really quick. And it's never the case, even with engineers that have been doing it for 30 years and who are extremely talented. As a matter of fact, I find those are the ones that are most willing to try things that they know that won't work, and then don't get dejected when they have to throw it out and start over. They're much more willing to experiment. They're much more willing to, and they start doing things on a smaller scale and then working up. They don't try and bite off something huge, because they know that that's a dangerous position to be in. So those are really my two pieces of advice. Keep things small, especially when you're starting out, because even the smallest project is really, really big when you're learning how to do every single piece of it. And know that it's going to be iterative. Iteration is how this stuff is going to get a lot better, because your first stuff is going to be rough. Everyone's is.
Yeah, I that is such fantastic advice, and it should be. I think that should be repeated a lot more, because I was involved in a project actually pretty recently, where the group I was in bit off way more than we could chew, and it just ended up being horrible. And I think a lot of people don't realize it. Don't be afraid to do something small. It's gonna be pretty rough anyway. But just fantastic advice. And I wish I had known it sooner.
Everyone does, and I mean those kind of early projects are a good learning experience. So everyone should go through it at least once. But I know people who keep doing it over and over and over again, and it's like they really got to scale it back, because they could do some really amazing stuff if they kept themselves in check a bit. And I'm as guilty about this as anyone. When I first was thinking about Sera, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll have an iPad version, and I'll have iCloud sync so that she knows what you said on your iPhone when you get to your iPad, and I'll have all this different stuff. And it's like, that isn't really necessary for the core experience that I'm trying to get across. So for the first version, just stick to the absolute essentials. You can add that stuff on later. That's the other cool thing about the App Store, is that it's really easy to add things in and have it pushed to every single user who downloaded it. That's really, really empowering, right? It's not something like in the old Nintendo days when they would delay things by 18 months because they were adding features and polishing things up. Because once they put that data on a cartridge, they couldn't go back and change it. Their customers were stuck with it. So we're actually in a really great time to make mistakes in products that people can actually pay for and go back and fix them later and just mea culpa. So it's a place where you can have iteration happening on products that you're actually trying to put in front of customers, not just stuff that you're working on in your own time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, with that as well, I mean, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because I do know of some game companies who have put out games that are sort of half-finished and like, oh, we'll just patch it later. So I guess in a sense it kind of swings both ways there. But I think that it's nice that you can do that now, at least, yeah.
Your goal should always be to create the most polished, most perfect product that you can. But it was never the case, right? Even those early games shipped with a lot of bugs. It's just they were kind of obscure bugs that nobody noticed or no one really cared. These days you can be a little bit fearless in that you can try something, and if it doesn't work, you can change it. Like a lot of updates that I see in social games are them saying like, oh yeah, the mage now does this much damage instead of this much damage, right?
Yeah.
Like they used to have to spend a lot of time playtesting to balance all of those things. Now they can be a little bit brave and throw something out there that they think might work, and if it does, great, and if it doesn't, they'll just change it. So it's a neat time to get these, again, experiences that you wouldn't have gotten in previous console generations or in other mediums.
Fantastic. Well, Nicholas, you've been one amazing guest, and you've said so many really great stuff. I love this interview. This was fantastic. Guys, I've been here with Nicholas Derk. His game is Sera. It's out on Kickstarter right now. Has it been completely funded yet? I haven't had the opportunity to check it.
Oh, hell no. I'm only at like $200 out of 9,000.
Oh, well, then we'll see if we can get a couple extra eyes on it, because it is a really interesting game, and a developer, I think, who can make something to really contribute to the medium. So go check out his Kickstarter, throw a couple of bucks his way if you can, and go and support Sera. I know I'd love to see something like that. I didn't get to mention this earlier on in the show, but I thought it was kind of a unique feature that she kind of checked in with you, or you had to check in with her every day, and that's something that really isn't done in games as much anymore. I know there's something like, the closest thing I can imagine is like Pokemon, where certain shops are open on certain days and you have to check in there. But I think it's really nice that it's a constant engaging sort of experience. So, that's a unique feature as well.
It's something cool that we can do now that we have these really powerful computers in our pocket the shape of phones, is that you can do these experiences. Like, you're not going to carry your PlayStation 3 everywhere,
No.
right? But it's not too much to ask for people to have their phone with them every day and to check on her for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And again, if she's not important to you and you don't, she'll remember. And so that kind of stuff gets me excited, that there's storytelling things I can do with how you manage your time in the real world and how you manage your priorities. And I've been rambling enough, but there's a lot of neat aspects like that. So one thing I would ask, because I am a bit shameless, is the biggest thing to help people know about Sera is to pimp her on Facebook. So if you go to seratheapp.co, there's links to Sera's Twitter account, Sera's Facebook page, and the Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, and
so
I'll put all that stuff in the description, and we'll have, there'll be shit on screen, like, scrolling by, and like links you can click. So do not worry about that. I'm more than happy to pimp you out to the viewers. It's the least I can do for having you on the show. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add, Nick, before we wrap this up?
No, I just wanted to thank you for having me on. This was a good experience. Anytime I can get a soapbox, I take advantage of it.
You know, and we're happy to have you. And I just love yelling into a mic, my thoughts and things. I'm not much of a writer. I don't do the whole, I write my opinion down in, a forum or a blog or something. I like to talk. So this is really just the perfect medium for both of us to express ourselves.
Right on. Well, I know you paid me lots of money, but I would have done this for free.
Dude, shh, be quiet. You can't know about that.
Okay. I'm sorry. We can cut all this out.
All right. Thank you again, Nick, for being on the show. Guys, we'll see you with another ramble. We might have I'm trying to do this kind of thing where I bring on some more kind of guests and their Kickstarters and stuff. So look forward to that in future rambles. And again, look forward to future episodes in which I may or may not finally get to work on my own game. I'm sorry if you've been waiting for that. I've been busy. But thank you for being with us. I've probably said that a million times. And we'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, this is the Chic Monster. Don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends, tell your family, and all that YouTube bullshit. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.